The state of Minnesota is known for its beautiful landscapes, friendly people, and strong sense of community. However, it is also home to a number of notorious criminals who have committed some of the most heinous crimes in the state's history. These individuals have shocked the community with their violent acts and left a lasting impact on the families of their victims. From cold-blooded murderers to sexual predators, these top 10 notorious criminals from Minnesota represent some of the darkest moments in the state's history. Join us as we take a closer look at their crimes, motives, and ultimate punishments. At number 10 we have David Braum. David Braum was a notorious serial killer from Minnesota. He was active in the early 1990s and is known to have murdered 3 young women in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Braum was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison in 1992 and died in prison in 2006. He was known for his brutal and sadistic crimes, which involved sexual assault and torture, and his case received widespread media coverage at the time of his arrest and trial. Number 9. Isidor Blumenfeld. Isidor Blumenfeld, also known as Kid Can, was a notorious organized crime figure from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was active in the 1920s through the 1940s and was known as the kingpin of the Minneapolis underworld during that time. Kid Can was involved in a variety of illegal activities, including bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution, and he was known for his ruthless and violent tactics. He was arrested multiple times, but was never successfully convicted for his crimes, and he died in 1981. Number 8. Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin is a former Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd in May 2020. The death of George Floyd, which was captured on video, sparked widespread protests and calls for racial justice and police reform across the United States and around the world. Chauvin's trial, which took place in the spring of 2021, received significant media attention and was seen as a significant moment in the ongoing conversations about race and policing in the United States. Number 7. Billy Glaze. Billy Glaze was a man from Minneapolis, Minnesota who was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of 3 women in the late 1980s. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison in 1990, and he died in prison in 2008. Glaze's case was notable for the extensive media coverage it received at the time of his arrest and trial, and for the controversy surrounding his conviction. Some people have questioned the evidence against Glaze and have called for his case to be reopened, but these efforts have been unsuccessful. Number 6. Bryn Hartman. Bryn Hartman was a woman from Minneapolis, Minnesota who killed her husband, comedian Phil Hartman, in 1998 before taking her own life. The incident was widely covered by the media and shocked the entertainment industry, as Phil Hartman was a well-known and well-loved performer. The case was notable for the high-profile nature of the victim, as well as for the shocking nature of the crime. Phil Hartman's death was widely mourned, and it was widely seen as a tragedy. The case was also seen as an example of the dangers of domestic violence, and it was widely discussed in the media in the years following the incident. Number 5. Karl Panzram. Karl Panzram was a notorious serial killer and rapist from the early 20th century. Born in Minnesota, Panzram committed a string of murders and other crimes across the United States during the 1910s and 1920s. He was known for his violent and sadistic behavior and for his hatred of authority and the legal system. Panzram was eventually arrested and sentenced to life in prison, where he wrote a series of highly controversial and inflammatory letters that further cemented his reputation as one of the most notorious criminals of his time. Despite his crimes, Panzram became something of a cult figure in the years following his death, and his letters and other writings continue to be widely read and studied. Number 4. Paul Michael Stephanie. Paul Michael Stephanie was a serial killer from Minnesota who was active in the 1980s. Stephanie was convicted of killing 3 women in the Twin Cities area, and is believed to have been responsible for several other murders as well. He was known for his cunning and evasiveness, and for his ability to evade the police for years despite a massive manhunt. Stephanie was eventually captured and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1998. Despite his crimes, Stephanie is not as well known as some other notorious serial killers from the same era, and his case is not widely studied or discussed today. Number 3. Jeff Weiss. Jeff Weiss was a school shooter from Red Lake, Minnesota. On March 21, 2005, he shot and killed 9 people, including 5 students, at Red Lake High School, before taking his own life. The shooting was one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history, and it shocked the nation and the local community. Weiss had a troubled past, including a history of depression, social isolation, and involvement in neo-Nazi online forums. The shooting raised questions about the potential dangers posed by such online communities and led to increased scrutiny of the mental health resources available to young people. Number 2. Buck Zumhofe. Buck Zumhofe is a former professional wrestler from Minnesota who was convicted of sexual assault in the 1990s. Zumhofe was convicted of multiple counts of criminal sexual conduct and was sentenced to several years in prison. He was also accused of sexually assaulting young girls who he trained in wrestling. Zumhofe's crimes sparked outrage and condemnation from the wrestling community, and he remains a controversial figure to this day. At number 1 we have Joseph Donald Tour, Jr. Joseph Donald Tour, Jr. is an American serial killer, rapist, burglar, and kidnapper who murdered at least 3 women and 3 children in Minnesota from 1978 to 1980. Originally convicted of a single murder in 1981, his more complete exposure occurred in the late 1990s based upon multiple reinvestigations, which also pinpointed him in numerous unsolved rapes. In conclusion, the crimes committed by these top 10 notorious criminals from Minnesota serve as a reminder of the evil that exists in the world and the importance of holding those who break the law accountable for their actions. While it is important to remember the victims of these heinous crimes and the families they left behind, it is also crucial that we continue to strive for a safer society and work to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos.